Hey, you guys, it is great to be back live again. It has been a while since we've done a Facebook Live, but this one is a really big deal. We are very excited to be able to be bringing to you more information about Sabina the movie, which is all about the founders of Voice of the Martyrs, and their story is truly a poignant one and one that I think will be an encouragement and a help to all who listen in. The tagline of this movie is that forgiveness is at the heart of the gospel, and I think I messed that up a little bit, but it is something that is so important for all of us to meditate on and to really truly wrap our heads around. And I think you're going to be encouraged and moved greatly by this story. So I am very excited to get you more information about this today. So if you will give us 1 second, I'm going to bring Todd Nettleton on camera here in 1 second. Todd is the host of the Voice of the Martyrs radio, and he's the media spokesperson for Sabina the movie. And so he has got all the answers. If you have additional questions for us that you want to make sure that we ask and we talk about while we're discussing this movie, then be sure you leave them in the comments. I should be able to see them as we're talking, and I'll be sure to throw those out for him. So join with me in welcoming Todd to our Facebook Live here. Todd, thank you so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, you are very, very welcome. I am really excited to be able to tell everybody a little bit more about Sabina the movie. Now, I know that Richard and Sabina Wormbrand founded Voice of the Martyrs back in the 60s, I think around 1962, I think you said. And it's a great way to fulfill the Great Commission and to help people understand what's going around the world. But why do you think that all these years later, their story still continues to impact families and encourage people even today?
Well, as you mentioned, the theme of this film is really forgiveness. It's the forgiveness that Richard and Sabina found in Christ, but it's their ability to forgive even their enemies. And Sabina and Richard were both born into Jewish families. In fact, Sabina's entire family died in the Nazi death camps.
Wow.
And yet she was able to forgive the Nazi soldiers that killed her family. And not just, this is the great thing and really an important thing I think about the film, is it's not just a kind of a mental assent. Oh yeah, I forgive those people. But she actually put feet to her forgiveness. She actually welcomed Nazis into her home and cooked meals for them and lived out that forgiveness. So, you ask, how is this story from World War II so timely today? All of us have things that we need to forgive. All of us have been hurt or wronged by somebody. And forgiveness is hard. We need to see an example of someone who says, you know what? It is difficult, but I forgive you. And then, like I say, to see Sabina live that out and put feet to her forgiveness is really inspiring. So I think a lot of people are going to walk out of the theater and think, okay, if Sabina can forgive the Nazi soldiers who killed her family, surely I can forgive my coworker who I don't get along with very well. Surely I can forgive that person who offended me. I think there's going to be a lot of forgiveness that grows out of people seeing this film and being inspired by it.
Well, and forgiveness brings such relief to the person who grants it. Not only is it freeing for the person who receives it, but as someone giving that forgiveness, the power of that in my own life is just huge, because it like takes a shackle off of you and really frees you to do what God has called you to do going forward. So I do pray that is the offshoot of this film, that we see an awful lot of relationships mended and forgiveness offered in the days ahead. Well, this film tells the story of their life really from Sabina's point of view, which is different. I think you all have released Tortured for Christ before, that was kind of his side of the story. How is this different? What will our families, or what can our families expect to see in this that they may have not seen in the other one?
Well, this film is really a Tortured for Christ, the movie. movie. And so Tortured for Christ, the movie, shows Richard and the communists in Romania being persecuted. Richard would spend 14 years in prison. Sabina spent 3 years in prison. And they were able to love their persecutors, wow, love their torture. It's easy when you see that first film to think, wow, that is really heroic faith. I could never be like that. That is just so far beyond me. I could never get a point. The great thing about Sabina, this new film, the prequel, is when we meet Richard and Sabina in this film, they're not even believers. They are atheists. They are people who have rejected religion. They have rejected faith. And we get to see them come to the point of forgiveness. First, Richard, and Sabina's response when Richard chose to follow Jesus was anger.
Wow.
In fact, she was going to commit suicide to punish Richard for following Jesus Christ. So you get to see that transformation from atheistic pleasure seekers to people who are following Jesus Christ, and then to people who not only are following Jesus Christ, they're willing to suffer for his sake. And so the great thing about this, no matter who you are, you're an unbeliever or whether you've been walking with the Lord for a long time, you can find yourself somewhere along the path that Richard and Sabina take in this film. And so it's, in my mind, I think it's a more approachable film than Tortured for Christ was.
Wow. Well, that's awesome. I know I receive your magazine every month, and we've actually got an offer where all of our families can sign up for Voice of the Martyrs, get that free magazine every month, get the Fox's Voice of Martyrs, which is just fantastic. But one of the things that is so encouraging to my heart is reading the stories of these families right now who are making the choices to live out their faith, to offer forgiveness, to walk really truly by faith and not by sight in situations that are hard for us here in the States to even wrap our heads around, because their reality is so different. With that in view, how do you think that this movie, talking about religious persecution, will echo today? How is that relevant today? What are you all seeing in the work that you do that kind of ties all this together?
Well, there are still Richards and Sabinas around the world today in more than 70 countries where Christians are persecuted for their faith. And, one of the scenes in the film shows Richard and Sabina. They're about to be stopped at a Nazi checkpoint, and they're talking about, should we go? Should we leave Romania? It is dangerous here. We don't have a future here. It's going to get harder. Should we leave? And they make that decision. No, this is where God has us. This is where God's called us. We're going to stay here. We're going to serve him. And he can protect us, or if he allows suffering to come our way, he can empower us to endure that suffering. So we're going to stay here. That decision that Richard and Sabina made in the 1940s is a decision that families in Afghanistan made just a few weeks ago. Yeah. The Taliban is coming. We know it's going to be more dangerous. We know it's going to get very difficult for us. Should we stay? Should we go? So many of those families decided, we're going to stay here. That's the same decision. And I think as we see these stories, and I love it that you mentioned Fox, the Fox book, and the monthly magazine from the Voice of the Martyrs, and this film, I think as Christians, every time we read a story of a persecuted Christian or we see it on a movie screen, the natural response is, what would I do in that situation? How would I respond to that danger or that threat or that ultimatum? And I think the great result of that is we get to go to the Lord and say, Lord, I know what I want to say I would do, but I'm not sure I'm there yet. Help me to grow more bold. Help me to grow more strong in my faith, to be able to truly say, I would do exactly what that brother or that sister did. I would stand strong for Christ, no matter the danger, no matter the risk. So I think as we see these stories and as we ask that question, hey, what would I do? That is a great time for the Lord to work on our hearts and strengthen our faith.
Yeah, absolutely. We were actually talking in small group last night, looking at James 1 and the fact that God positions trials as actually bringing good. We should count it all joy. These bring endurance and all of these other things. But that's not generally our point of view on it. We don't look at those trials as something that God will use in our lives to bring good or to open doors or opportunities. So, what do you think, having walked through this and then having taken this experience and actually started this phenomenal ministry, what do you think that the Wormbrands would actually say to those who are facing persecution now?
I think they would say, carry on, hold
Mm.
fast, carry on, stay strong. And the other thing I think they would say, and certainly now from the perspective of eternity, they would say, Jesus is worth it.
Yeah.
Everything we're experiencing now in heaven is worth so much more than, what Paul called our light momentary affliction. Our light momentary affliction of, in Richard's case, 14 years in prison. He would say that was so worth it. And so I think they would just encourage brothers and sisters facing persecution today, just as they would encourage us who are not necessarily facing persecution. Carry on, continue to walk with Christ. Whatever price you may pay, he is worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love, they have a very different perspective now. That is because the Lord took them home back many years ago. But yes, their faith is now sight, and that is an amazing thing to think about, as well, as they both walked really rough paths here on earth, and yet God used them so profoundly to impact lives all around the world. And thinking about the ministry that they started and the impact that God did use them, the way that he used them all around the world, what was Sabina's role in actually starting and kind of supporting Richard through the ministry of Voice of the Martyrs?
Well, I like to tell people there is no Richard Wormbrand without Sabina Wormbrand. And so in many ways, she was his alter ego, over 6 feet tall. She was under 5 feet tall. So they were physically very different. But she had such a fire about her and such a love for the Lord. One of the famous stories, maybe the most famous story, is when they were called by the communists in Romania to what the communists called a Congress of the Cults. All the different religious leaders were brought together, and it was this big symposium where they could talk about how communism and religion really we could work hand in hand. We could work together. We can all be friends. And in fact, one of the statements they made was that, when you really think about it, Jesus was actually the first communist. And so Richard and Sabina were sitting in this auditorium hearing this, and Sabina looked at Richard and said, "Richard, stand up and wipe this shame from the face of Christ." And Richard looked back at her and said, "If I do that, you no longer have a husband." And Sabina famously shot back, "I do not wish to have a coward for a husband."
Wow.
And so she really kind of provided the steel in Richard's spine to stand up at that meeting and say, listen, our first loyalty is not to any party. Our first loyalty is to Jesus Christ. And from that day forward, he was a marked man and ultimately would go to prison for 14 years. As you read about their stories, as you see in the films, they were a matched pair. And there is no Richard without Sabina. There is no Sabina without Richard. God brought them together for very specific purposes to fulfill his kingdom plans for them and for Christians around the world who suffer persecution.
Well, and isn't that what we pray for our children all the time? I was just literally talking last night to one of my sons about the fact that God puts people together to fulfill his plan. That is why marriage is such a powerful thing, because I bring something to our relationship and to the ministry that God has given us that David needs, and David the same way. It's amazing the way that God is so wise in putting people together, and it's so exciting to be able to look and actually see this whole body of work and how God took these two individuals that had their own skills and personalities and statures and everything else, and made them so perfectly compatible to do exactly what he called them to do. And what he called them to do was actually a pretty hard thing to do as they were walking it. I know. So that's awesome for us as families to remember that God weaves all of this together, and that's how we should be praying for our children, that they find the one that can actually push them to be exactly who God has called them to be. Well, the message of this film, the forgiveness, all of this is so powerful. We largely minister to families. What would you say is really what families are going to extract from this, and how do you hope that this will encourage them in their walk, both within their homes, but also as that relates to their community and the world at large?
I think one of the things that families will bring out of this is that nobody is too far from God's grace, that God can every single person with his grace. And that includes a young woman, very well educated, brilliant young woman named Sabina Wormbrand. That includes a Nazi death camp guard who presided over the deaths of hundreds of people. That includes you. That includes me. None of us are beyond the reach of God's grace. And I think that's a great lesson for families, for parents to instill in their children. As we look at the people around us, we need to be sure we're not seeing someone as, oh, God could never get a hold of that person. Yeah. Because, and this movie shows it so well, God can get a hold of anybody.
Yeah. Well, and it's culture has gotten so combative that we even feel that way sometimes about, or at least the temptation is there to feel that way about people who just disagree with us. Who, we have created this culture where the differences are so deep and the divides are so deep and the passions run so high that finding that grace for individuals is so very important, just in the small things, let alone these very big, truly difficult to forgive infractions that happened in this film and in lives of people all around the world. Yeah, and so I want to double back. We talked, or I talked before I brought you on, about the tagline of the movie. Can you tell us what that is? Because I think I said it. I think I got the words out of order a little bit. But I love the tagline of the movie and really what it encapsulates. But what, as you guys were naming it, as we're really pulling that out, what did you want to communicate with that and want people to take away with that tagline?
Well, the tagline, as you mentioned, is the heart of the gospel is forgiveness. And really, we wanted people to understand that. And as you see the film, like I say, you see that forgiveness lived out. You see Richard and Sabina accept the forgiveness from Christ. And then you see them turn around and offer forgiveness to people around them. And so seeing that lived out is such a powerful example and such a powerful reminder. But the other thing that comes through in this is forgiveness is not cheap. It wasn't cheap for Christ to forgive us. It's not cheap for us to forgive someone else. It involves hurt. It involves setting aside some of our natural feelings of hurt and anger and pain and being able to say, you know what? I can forgive you as well. So I think that theme just echoes throughout the film so powerfully. And I think it's going to echo in the hearts of people who see the film even long after they leave the theater.
Yeah, I do too. And I really hope that is the case, that the softening, the recognition of what God through his grace has given us, and the understanding that then we are to share that with others, to really point them to the Savior that loves them and offers the ultimate forgiveness and grace. One last question that I wanted to throw out about the movie in particular is, as you're watching through it, you really are drawn to just the beauty of their relationship, the complexities of their relationship, all of these things. But one of the things that I kind of took away from it was kind of the resemblance of Sabina and Richard's relationship to that of Christ and his church, and how did you all kind of weave that through?
It's interesting because Rich came to Christ first.
Hmm.
And at the time, Sabina, who had been born into a Jewish family, for her, that was just almost blasphemous that her husband would say Jesus is Lord. How could this happen? How could you even say that? How could you even think that? And seeing Richard respond with so much grace and so much love and so much respect for her, and not, he didn't try to browbeat her into his side. He didn't try to just, overpower her with intellectual arguments. He was just so gentle and led her gently to that idea that Christ is Lord. Jesus is the Son of God. I think that, as you say, it does reflect the way Christ is gentle with us and the way he doesn't overpower us. He has the right to, but he gently leads us to that point of faith. And I think, as you say, honestly, before you said that, I hadn't really thought of that reflection, but it is such a good reflection of how Christ ministers to us.
I love that. Well, you guys are releasing this film through Fathom Events, I think. So it's got a fairly limited release, limited opportunity to see this in the theaters. Can you tell us when it's playing, first of all, and how big is the release? Are there group opportunities available? What can you tell our family so that they can make their plans to see this while it's in theaters?
It is only in theaters next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, November 8th, 9th, and 10th. So 3 days only, but it's in more than 830 theaters around the country. So it is widespread distribution. There should be a theater close to you wherever you're at, but it is only those 3 nights. So that's an important thing. SabinaMovie.com is the website. Sabina, Sabina, SabinaMovie.com. If you put in your zip code, when you click on buy tickets, if you put in your zip code, it'll pull all the theaters that are closest to you, and you can actually buy tickets right there online.
Oh, fantastic. The other thing, I've already gotten a question from a mom who, actually there were 3 of them chiming in on this, who are very interested in seeing the movie. They really want to take their families, but their question is, how young of children would it be appropriate to bring to see this? Because this is a tough story. So at what age would you think would be appropriate to bring to see this movie?
That's a hard question for anyone to answer because every parent and every child kind of has their own sensibilities about that. The film is rated PG-13, but if you saw Tortured for Christ, there were some scenes of Richard in prison and Richard being tortured. There's nothing like that in this film. There is some scenes of some partying from Richard and Sabina's early days. There are scenes of them in prison, but it's not violent. Again, I hesitate to even suggest to someone else, but I would think if a child is 10 or 11 or 12 years old, if a child has watched some of the superhero movies, Spider-Man or whatever, there is not going to be anything in this film that they would find overwhelming if they have, if they're, like I'd say, I would say 10, 11, 12, much below 10, maybe it might be a little beyond them.
Right. A little even difficult to grasp what's really going on. The other thing that I would think about, just as kind of mom to mom here, is if you have studied this time period, if you've studied what happened during World War II and the Holocaust and all of those things, it's really, really powerful to then connect real life stories with that. The Lord allowed our family, actually, we have ministries in Poland, so we have actually taken our kids to Auschwitz, and to walk there and to see what happened. It will change your perspective on everything forever. And my youngest was probably 6 years old when we went there. So her experience and the way that she related to being there was very different than my older kids, who were probably 10, 11, 12 at the time. But still, they remember it. They were changed by it. Their empathy for what happened, their realization of these were real people, it changes. And so it's a very powerful thing as just something concrete to add to those history lessons that you've taught, because this is a real person story, a real family story, how their lives were impacted by what was going on during that time. So I would kind of tack that on to what he said as you're working through whether to bring your children or not. It's something that I think would be a nice addition to conversations on that time period too. So anyway, good history lesson, as well as a powerful ministry lesson, a powerful life lesson, and a focus on the forgiveness and grace in God. So Todd, thank you so much for taking the time to come out and explain to us what's coming and what we can expect from Sabina the movie.
It has been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, you are welcome. And everybody else, I have linked to the website for the movie in the description of this video. I will also go back in and leave a comment so that if you want to sign up for the Voice of the Martyrs resources, like I was alluding to before, that's a super easy thing to do. You can go to vom.org/TTD and you'll get the Book of Martyrs or the stories book, Voices of the Martyrs, and that monthly magazine. You really need to go get that, because just the awareness of what's going on around the world and how God is using men and women in impossible situations or very difficult situations, it will move you, it will challenge you, and it will give you some really great opportunities to talk to your kids about what's their line, what are they willing to stand through, and then all of you really get the foundation so that if they're ever called to stand in such a situation, they would be ready. So I will leave you that link. Make sure you make your plans to go see Sabina next week, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. You can get your tickets online. It's a Fathom event, so you can go through the website that we've got linked. You can probably search it on Fathom Events as well. Grab your friends, go see it. And I hope you'll tell me what you thought. I look forward to hearing about it. So have a great afternoon. And Todd, again, I thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Bye-bye, everybody.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.